Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the City of Bellevue City Council regular meeting for October 19th, 2020. City Clerk, could you do roll call, please?
Sure. Mayor Robinson.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse.
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson.
Present.
Councilmember Stokes.
Here.
And Councilmember Zahn.
Here.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Zahn, can you please lead us in the flag salute?
Yes, absolutely, Mayor. I pledge allegiance
To the flag.
to the flag of the United States of America
To the
and to the
republic
republic for which it
Which
stands,
stands
one
one
nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice
for all.
all. Thank you. Well, we have a proclamation tonight for Domestic Violence Action Month. Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse, could you read that entire proclamation, please?
Certainly, Mayor, thank you. Whereas domestic violence is a serious crime that affects 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men during their lifetime, and whereas domestic violence is widespread and has a devastating impact on survivors, children, families in our community, and whereas domestic violence does not discriminate and crosses all economic, racial, gender, educational, religious, and societal barriers and is sustained by indifference. And whereas ending the cycle of this vicious crime requires the courage of survivors and the support of the larger community, and whereas education, prevention, and intervention efforts to end the cycle of domestic violence are imperative to not only protect survivors, but also to increase public awareness of the severity and extent of domestic violence. Now, therefore, on behalf of Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, I do hereby proclaim the month of October 2020 as Domestic Violence Action Month in Bellevue. I urge all citizens to speak out against domestic violence and support LifeWire's efforts to prevent and end domestic abuse in our communities and increase public awareness of and action on this issue. Ending violence in the home is a national imperative that requires vigilance and dedication from every sector of our society. We must continue to stand alongside LifeWire, advocates, service providers, law enforcement, and our criminal justice system as they hold offenders accountable and provide care and support to survivors. By our efforts, we must extend beyond the criminal justice system to include housing and economic advocacy for survivors. We must work with young people to stop violence before it starts. We must also reach out to friends and loved ones who have suffered from domestic violence, and we must tell them they are not alone. We encourage survivors, their loved ones, and concerned citizens to learn more by calling the LifeWire helpline at 425-746-1940 or by simply visiting lifewire.org. This October, let us honor Domestic Violence Action Month by promoting peace in our own families, homes, and communities. Let us renew our commitment to end domestic violence and its brutal and destructive effects in every city, in every town, and every corner of America.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next we have approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 City Clerk, do we have oral communications tonight?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Tonight there is one pre-registered speaker, and that person is Sue Kingston. And Miss Kingston, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Your time begins now.
Hi, my name is Sue Kingston. My husband, Tom Ellis, grew up in Bellevue, and Tom and I have lived in Ennetai for over 30 years. I am here tonight regarding the budget, and I'm out to begin implementing Vision Zero now. Here because our daughter was hit by a car last November in Bellevue. Carrie is 34, has Down syndrome, and lives with us. She is very capable and has very hard to be independent and have her own life. She has been employed for 13 years at a law firm in Bellevue where she works part-time as an office assistant. She has been acting at Bellevue Youth Theater since 2006, and she swims year-round with Special Olympic gold medals, freestyle and butterfly. She does not drive. She takes the bus everywhere, to work, to theater, and to love friends. We keep tabs on her. She calls when she gets on a bus or in a building. On Monday, November 18th, she called me at about 7 p.m. to say she was done with her rehearsal and down through Cross to get the bus. She pushed the button to cross 156 at Northeast. She got a walk sign and she started across. A car coming out of the condo complex on the west side of the intersection had a green light and turned left onto 156, hitting Carrie. Carrie was knocked down in front of the car. The driver got out of her car, remembers her saying, "I had a green light, I had a green light." The driver told her she was going to call an ambulance. Carrie is terrified of sirens. Her bus had gone by as she lay on the ground, and all she wanted to do was get on her bus. There was a witness who helped Carrie get to the bus and onto the bus. Then she called me, this time rather panicked. "Mom, I'm on my bus," but I was hit by a car. We picked her up and took her to Overlake's ER. Her left arm was just hanging. Her lower leg was bruised. When asked what her pain level was from 0 to 10, she very calmly said, "Way more than 10. Carrie had a concussion and her left shoulder was broken. The upper part of her humerus was fractured completely through the bone, with the top part shifted, tilted, and jammed back down onto the rest of the bone. She was in a sling 24/7 for 6.5 weeks, not able to use her arm at all. She slept propped up on edge. She needed help getting in and out of bed, dressing, bathing, and more. So she had many, many doctor appointments, a couple of CT scans, more x-rays, and physical therapy with exercises to do at home. She couldn't work. She needed to be driven everywhere. There were bills to keep track of and complications regarding her benefits relating to her disability. She was cleared to return to work March 2nd. She's currently working 3 days a week. She swims, but her shoulder still hurts. She talks about her life before getting hit and after getting hit. I'm asking you to please support funding for Vision Zero now. No one should have to go through what my daughter is still going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kingston. That is the end of our pre-registered speakers. At this time, I would ask if there is any participants in this meeting tonight that would like to provide oral communication to the City Council. If so, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. If you're connected with a phone, please use *9. And of the remaining participants, I do not see anyone raising their hand, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. City Manager, would you like to give us your report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Robinson, and council members. I have one item under the City Manager's report, but before I get to that item, I wanted to highlight one item under our consent calendar, and that is item 8G, Resolution 9829, approving the Arch 2021 budget and work plan. I'm highlighting this item because the Arch budget and work plan at the direction of the council was brought back under the consent calendar before the council actually took action to impose the additional sales tax for affordable housing and mental and behavioral services. And I wanted to highlight for council that an amendment to the Arch budget and work plan may be possible in the future once the council agrees on an implementation plan that the staff brings back to them. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. The one topic I did want to present tonight is the Cultural Conversations annual update. And just by way of background, the Cultural Conversations began as an outreach program for women designed to help build community and connection through its, power of storytelling. And today, the Cultural Conversations is a network of over 700 participants who meet monthly to build bridges of connections and understanding across Bellevue's diverse community. This was last presented back to the council back in April of 2018. And in February, when we actually celebrated the 10-year anniversary of Cultural Conversations. This update that you'll receive tonight is for information only. And joining us tonight is Mike McCormick-Kuntelman, Assistant Director, and Mark Heilman, Neighborhood Outreach Manager, both from the Community Development Department. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, City Manager Miyake. Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse, council member. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and talk about the Cultural Conversations program. Tonight is for information only, so we're not asking council to take any action tonight. We did want to begin, however, by recognizing that much of the success of this program has been largely done in part to Carol Ross, who runs and manages the program. Unfortunately, she's not here tonight due to a family emergency, but we hope to represent the program well in her absence. As City Manager Miyake mentioned, this past year, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And we began in 2008, 2009, during the last Great Recession. And this program was initiated by our community. They wanted to break the isolation that many residents were experiencing, and they wanted to build connections of understanding for our diverse community. And over the last 10 years, this program has had to be dynamic and adapt to the changing needs of our community.
Hey, Mike.
So what we've seen
Mike, sorry, there's an image, probably a window open on the right side of the presentation that's blocking some of the content there. I don't know if others can see it.
All right. We can work with Mark as he's sharing his screen to close those windows.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Barksdale. So the last 10 years, one of the things I wanted to highlight tonight was just ways that the program has been dynamic and adapting to the changes in the community. 10 years ago, when the program began, it was a small group of women who wanted to meet together and understand each other and their differences. They created things like a world cookbook where people shared recipes from around the world. We've captured the power of storytelling and documented that to share for others to learn from. We've created a best practice handbook for organizers to learn how to host cultural conversations. We've added an evening of cultural conversations for men to join in the practice, and we host that annually in February. And now in 2020, we've had to adapt again, given the pandemic, as well as the need to be socially distant. And so to talk about this year of cultural conversations and ways we've adapted, I wanted to turn things over to Mark Heilman, our neighborhood outreach manager. Mark?
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, council. I know that many of us have experienced, and we know that during this time, there is just a profound need to be able to meet and support one another. It's become even more crucial over the last 7 months. So in the recent COVID impact survey of residents that we did about a month and a half ago, we received responses in 4 different languages, which pointed to the decreased sense of community over the past several months that our community has experienced. The survey revealed that 64% of respondents reported that they had a moderate or severe decrease in their sense of community. Specifically, with cultural conversations participants, we have noticed an increase in isolation and loneliness, but also resiliency and a profound care for their loved ones and families that they have not been able to see, possibly in other countries. As Mike said, Cultural Conversations has developed a safe and welcoming environment for everyone in our changing community. It's a place of learning and understanding, and that has been accomplished through sharing culture and crafts, enjoying meals together, and then also hearing very personal, difficult, and impactful topics from local speakers. In fact, this particular evening, this slide that you see, I think most of council was there to hear this young lady who had moved here from India a few years ago. And then it's also become a very safe place for deeper discussions after participants have heard those speakers. And it's a place where everyone belongs and can feel embraced. And as we have now experienced 7 months of distanced interactions, a very relational program is adapting from meeting at the very familiar Crossroads Community Center and is now helping residents to meet remotely. We're learning new ways to connect, and in June launched a Cultural Conversations webpage on engagingbellevue.com. We've invited residents to share stories and to begin to reconnect. They have also assisted participants to gain access and comfort with Zoom meetings And Carol and her team have been walking residents through the specifics of logging on, moving into break rooms, and most importantly, starting to share impactful stories once again. Due to these efforts, we are seeing approximately the same number of participants engaging with us remotely as had been in person. So Carol and her team have hosted online conversations which have centered around the importance of communication and support, especially when meeting and caring remotely. In September, residents were welcomed to an online session entitled Creating Home Together with this invitation. During this historic time of upheaval, the conversation group will share stories and inspiration on how to feel more at home given isolation and uncertainty and anxiety. How might we strengthen relationships that we value and build inclusive relationships that we wish to create? Cultural Conversations has always been focused on helping to gather the community and now is working on doing that in new ways. Carol and her team will continue to respond as we learn about both the needs of the community and virtual methods to provide a trusted space to connect, share, and inspire. The next Cultural Conversations is scheduled for this next Tuesday, focusing on women's suffrage and the power of civic leadership globally and in our region. So as Cultural Conversations begins its 11th and most unique year, thank you, Council, for your continued support for Cultural Conversations.
That's great. Thank you so much. I've been a part of that, as have all the council members, and it's just it's a privilege to participate in those conversations. Thank you. Okay, next up, we have 2 recommendations for our boards and commissions, and we will vote to approve or not approve the recommendations together. But I'll first ask Council Member Barksdale to introduce his recommendation for why am I forgetting what your Planning Commission? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. I recommend Carol Brown for the open position on the Planning Commission. Carol Brown has been a longtime Bellevue resident, which has contributed to her familiarity with the city and understanding about the range of issues that will impact planning and land use in the coming year. Carol has a passion for and actively engages in the community, having completed the Bellevue Essentials program and helped create the Eastgate Community Association. As an immigration attorney, Carol brings an awareness of an equity lens to how planning impacts people in our community whose voices are at times not heard. Carol resides in Eastgate, one of our growth areas, which is not currently represented on the Planning Commission.
Thank you very much. And then Councilmember Robertson, you have a recommendation for the Transportation Commission.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like to recommend Karen Stash for the seat on the Transportation Commission. She is an 18-year Bellevue resident. She lives in Ennetai. She is an engineer. One of her jobs as a consultant is to provide advice to Bellevue College, which is one of our great partners as well. She's one of the few people that we interviewed who mentions the importance of safety in her interview for pedestrians and bicyclists. She's very supportive of the multimodal system with a safer, more integrated transportation system. She also has some really interesting experience in her work representing working on multi-party and multifaceted projects, including with agencies such as DOE, tribes, state, federal, local government. And so she understands that you have to listen to all sides and you need to make, good decisions based on the data and listening to your colleagues. So I'm really excited to have her serve on the Transportation Commission, and I would recommend her for appointment.
Thank you both for your recommendations. Is there a motion to approve these recommendations?
So made. I move to approve the recommendations.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, next we have the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. So we are going to launch into a public hearing, and the rest of this meeting is going to be jam-packed. So I'm going to ask council members to really limit their comments and questions to 3 minutes. And anything that you cannot get answered tonight, we can get answered in an email later. And I'm going to ask Deputy Mayor to let people know when their 3 minutes is up. So it's better if you just time yourselves, but he'll say time and I'll give you a second to wrap up. But it's going to be a tight meeting to get through all the important material that we have tonight. So with that, let's start with this public hearing. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council Member. As you mentioned, this is a public hearing and action authorizing the release of a restrictive covenant. And just by way of background, the release of this covenant is being requested to allow the operator of the group home to sell the property and relocate to a new location, which will then become the subject to a new restrictive covenant. This was last in front of council back on September 8th of this year, where you set the date for tonight's public hearing. Following the public hearing, council will be asked to take action on a proposed resolution authorizing the execution of documents necessary to release the restricted covenant, including a covenant release and transfer of agreement. Joining us this evening is Ira McMahon, our real property manager with the Finance and Asset Management Department. With that, I'll turn it over to Ira for a brief staff report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Miyake, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. So I'll be providing the staff report on the request to release a restrictive covenant at 600 124th Avenue Northeast. So the subject property is located within the Wilburton neighborhood, and it's currently owned by a nonprofit called Alpha Supported Living Services, and it's being operated as a group home for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Alpha would like to move the residents of this property to a new home in Bellevue and then sell this property. To facilitate this move, they are asking the city to release a restrictive covenant from the property. So first, a little bit of history on this. In 1976, the predecessor to Alpha, which was Residence East, entered into an agreement with the city of Bellevue to develop the subject property into the group home. Under this agreement, Bellevue leased the property from Residence East, and Bellevue built and owned the building, which was in turn operated by Residence East. The construction of the building was paid for through grant funding from the state, with Bellevue acting as a pass-through agency. Then in 2009, the city of Bellevue transferred ownership of the building to Alpha Supported Living Services. And in exchange, and in accordance with state law, Alpha put a restrictive covenant on the property to ensure that its use will align with the original grant funding requirements. The current split level design of the structure is becoming difficult to navigate for the mobility challenged residents at this home. Alpha has asked that the city release the covenant so they can sell the property and use the funds to purchase other property that would be more accessible for their aging residents. City staff and Alpha have drafted an agreement that provides for the release of the existing restrictive covenant. This agreement requires that Alpha must purchase their new property in Bellevue and grant a replacement covenant on that property prior to the release of the old covenant. And tonight's public hearing is to provide the public an opportunity to comment on this release. And following the public hearing, staff will request council's action on the proposed resolution authorizing the execution of documents necessary to release the restrictive covenant. This ends our staff report.
Thank you. Is there a motion to open the public hearing? Hold on. I'm forgetting when questions from, let's do the public hearing first. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
I move to open the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, City Clerk, do we have any public testimony?
Thank you. There are no pre-registered speakers for the public hearing. So at this point, I would ask if there are any members participating in the meeting that would like to comment at this public hearing. If so, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or *9 if you're connected with a phone. Mayor, I do not see anyone indicating they would like to speak.
Okay, do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. So now we can do council discussion. I think I can see everybody. Is there anybody who has a question or a comment that they'd like to raise at this time? I'm not seeing any. So is there a motion?
I have a question.
Yes.
My question is,
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is, does the city have any interest in making sure that the service is provided and continued so that we can have, again, the knowledge and know whether it's, going to be appropriately continue or not?
So
they're a close one, they're going to open. That's it.
Yes, that's what's happening. So I want to make sure that I understand and address your question. So is there the restrictive covenant restricts the use of their new property to the purposes of providing social services, which will continue the use in Bellevue. That is the intent of the agreement and the intent of Alpha.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, Deputy Mayor, can you make a motion for us, please?
Certainly, I move to adopt Resolution 9828, releasing a restrictive covenant affecting the property at 600 124th Avenue Northeast, commonly known as Residence East.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that resolution passes. Thank you. Okay, we're on to study session items. We have 2 items tonight. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce them?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. Let's see, I am muted. Yeah, can you, okay. I just want to make sure I was unmuted. The first matter in front of you is on micromobility, which is the regulation of motorized foot scooters. Just by way of background, the use of motorized foot scooters in Bellevue is regulated by state and local vehicle codes. Electric scooters have become popular globally since 2018, and the business community has recently expressed an interest in considering a shared electric scooter pilot similar to what we're seeing in some of our peer cities. But local code functionally prevents their legal use as a personal transportation mode in Bellevue. Just in terms of when this is back, was been before the council was a while back, was in August 6th of 2007, where an adoption was adopted, ordinance 5758. And then it again came back to the council back on March 19th of 2018, where a study session briefing on a bike share pilot program. Tonight, after the presentation, the staff will be asking the council to consider directing to the Transportation Commission, the commission to work with the staff to review and recommend revisions to the city code regulating the use of motorized foot scooters in Bellevue. Joining us this evening is Andrew Singalakis, Director, and Andreas Pillar, Associate Planner, both of the Transportation Department. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Andrew for getting this presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, City Manager Miyake, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and the City Council. This is about the topic of electronic scooters. There's been some interest around this topic, and there are a lot of issues that we need to sort through. So we're recommending that the council refer this item to the Transportation Commission, who can research issues in a public setting. We briefed Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis and received some good feedback from him. He was the only one that took us up on the offer for a briefing. And we are hoping that the rest of the council raises issues tonight and concerns so that they can be more fully vetted in front of the Transportation Commission. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Andreas Pillar, who is an associate planner in the Transportation Department. Andreas.
Thank you, Andrew, and good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and council members. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening remotely. I hope you all can see my screen. If you have any trouble, please let me know. So as was mentioned, the direction that we are seeking from you all this evening is that you all consider directing the Transportation Commission to work with staff to review and, as deemed appropriate, recommend revisions to city code regulating the use of motorized foot scooters in Bellevue. The agenda for this evening is broken into 3 parts. First, looking at what the current regulations at the state and local level entail, followed by a brief history on how the local regulations came to be and the context for the conversation this evening, and then some considerations that we will be looking into if we receive the direction to work with the Transportation Commission on potentially modifying existing local code. So beginning with the current regulations, I'm beginning here with the definition according to the revised Code of Washington, the state code pertaining to motorized foot scooters, which specifies the number of wheels and a couple of basic factors of the form factor of or the elements that make up a motorized foot scooter. This was adopted, updated, excuse me, in 2019, and at this point it is inconsistent with the local definition of a motorized foot scooter, which matched the state's definition prior to that 2019 update. One area of distinction between the two is that our local code specifies the size of the wheels that constitute a foot scooter, and the state code no longer does. Over the next few slides here, what I'm going to show is just a quick run through of where, when, by whom, and how motorized foot scooters may be operated and the distinctions between the state and local ordinances. So the first column on the table, for anyone who isn't able to see it, speaks to the regulation type. The second is the state regulation of that, and the third is the local regulation. And I won't touch on every single one of these, but just highlight a few of note. So the first one being use on roadways. The state code allows their universal use on roadways to the same extent as bicycles, whereas the local code specifies that they're only allowed on roadways that have a speed limit of 25 miles per hour or less. Another notable regulation is that at the state level, they are not allowed to be used on sidewalks except where that sidewalk is part of a bikeway, and the local regulation upholds that and explicitly also makes that restriction. In terms of when they may be operated, the state code allows their use day and night so long as they have the approved reflectors on the device. Local code, however, restricts their use from after dusk and before dawn, so effectively not allowed at night regardless of the equipment that they have on them. And then how they may be operated, it's just worth noting that at the state level, a driver's license is not required for their use, and this isn't something that local code can or does weigh in on. But helmet requirement for their use is something that the local code requires that state code does not. And so all users of motorized foot scooters are required by local code to wear a helmet when riding. And finally, who may operate them at the state level. We have the regulation of 16 years of age as the minimum age allowed, but local jurisdictions are allowed to modify that. And the local code modifies that to allow younger riders as young as 14 years of age to use these devices. And it also specifies that only one person is allowed to ride these at a time. So a few implications of this existing local code. The most consequential is that they are sort of functionally illegal to use as a mode of transportation. And that's based on their restriction of being used both on sidewalks and their restriction of being used on any streets with speed limits over 25 miles per hour, as this effectively makes it illegal to ride them on most of the city's arterial roadways. So to get to most of its commercial centers, many of its parks, most employment areas and destinations, it's not legal to use them there. They can really primarily only be used on neighborhood streets. And so they're not really something that can be used for transport purposes. This code also precludes a shared mobility option that's available in many neighbor and peer cities nationally in the form of shared micromobility. This code contributes to a regional patchwork of laws that are not necessarily intuitive to the public because the restrictions that are in place in Bellevue may or may not align with our neighbors on the east side and across the lake in Seattle. And so this makes it challenging for users to know what they can and can't do, where they may and may not ride, and so forth. And then this distinction between the local and state law definition of what constitutes a motorized foot scooter leads to some regulatory ambiguities. Some devices fall in between the state's definition and ours, which may lead some shared micromobility operators to be uncertain of exactly where their device falls in terms of regulation in our city. So a little bit of history about how we got to this point today. The state authorized local regulation of motorized foot scooters by local jurisdictions back in 2004. And shortly thereafter, a number of our neighbor jurisdictions, including Seattle, Kirkland, and Issaquah, all adopted their own local ordinances. There was an effort at the time to have some code adopted in the motorized vehicle ordinance at the state level, motorized traffic code, and that was ultimately not done. So we have this patchwork developing at that time. The council at the time requested a briefing on scooters from staff and ultimately directed police to work with the Youth Link board, who then came back to council on a couple of occasions, ultimately in 2007, with a draft ordinance that the council adopted, which is when the current code was put in place. And this issue wasn't really an issue in the subsequent years. It wasn't brought before council, and there was no major issue related to foot scooters for about 10 years. But in 2018, shared e-scooters were deployed by private companies in cities around the world and really became a global phenomenon. They became hugely popular and drove many cities to reconsider their ordinances and how they may or may not allow or regulate these devices in their cities. The same year, Bellevue launched our e-bike share pilot that summer in 2018, and in 2019, many of our peer Washington cities launched e-scooter pilots of their own, including Tacoma, Spokane, Bothell, Redmond, and others. And Seattle has just launched theirs late this summer. So the local regulation in Bellevue in 2007, excuse me, was adopted to respond to community safety and noise concerns that council members had heard from members of the Bellevue community. And the noise in particular, it's worth noting, was related to the types of vehicles that were popular at that time, which were almost exclusively gas powered. And they were, the noise they created was compared to leaf blowers or outboard motorboats. So a very different type of device and impact to the community than the electric versions that are ubiquitous today in many places. So council directed staff work to begin in 2005 and adopted the ordinance that we have today in 2007. So a few considerations that are worth highlighting, and if we do receive the direction to work with the Transportation Commission on reviewing and considering revisions to this existing code, we can look to existing policy priorities, foremost among them being safety. As a city with a Vision Zero ordinance, forthcoming action plan. The safety is a key concern of ours, and one that most cities, if not all cities, put front and center as they consider the introduction of e-scooters and the regulation of them in their communities. The potential benefits or any impacts to sustainability, how available they are to all members of the community, and whether or not they're relaxing or changing the regulations in some way would make it easier for some groups or more difficult for other groups to travel in the city of Bellevue. Consistency is a notable one as well, both consistency with neighboring jurisdictions to the extent that it's reasonable, but also just consistency across device types. Are the current regulations sufficiently consistent with other similar devices to make it intuitive for people to understand where and how they can ride? And then engagement. You know, we certainly would want to make sure that we're engaging with local stakeholders in determining how this code would be revised, what concerns they have. This would be comparable to how we undertook planning for the bike share pilot, engaging local community stakeholders and determining what are their interests, their concerns, and how can we make sure that we address them. And I have parking asterisk there at the bottom because that consideration really is certainly an important one, and one that many communities grapple with for the shared e-scooter services. The asterisk being because it really pertains specifically to the shared devices. Many of these others relate both to private users and private owners of their own e-scooters. That one really specifically relates to shared services. And so this is where we can potentially also consider differentiation. So if there's an interest in, and it's regarded as appropriate to modify where and how people may use these scooters, but there are concerns about how shared scooter services may be deployed and used, there could be differentiation in terms of the code or regulation for private owners of their own personal e-scooters versus the shared scooters. There could be differentiation included for electric versus gas-powered. Even though gas-powered is no longer widely used, it could still be regulated differently. The chart at the bottom is from SAE International, which is a transportation standards organization that has developed this this matrix of different types of micromobility vehicles, and we could point towards their definitions for different types to the extent that they are consistent with state code, and you know, target specific regulations to these different types as deemed appropriate, and also by geography. It may again be appropriate for personal users of their own scooters to ride wherever they choose, but there could be restrictions either through technology or through regulation to not necessarily allow shared fleets of e-scooters to be used in the same way everywhere. One example may be the use of speed limited zones whereby users can't travel above a very low rate of speed, essentially discouraging their use in certain areas without outright restricting that use in those areas. So that brings me back to the direction that's being sought from council, which again is to consider directing the Transportation Commission to work with staff to review and as deemed appropriate, recommend revisions to city code regulating the use of motorized foot scooters in Bellevue.
Well, great, thank you very much. So I'm going to go ahead and call on each of you in the following order: Councilmember Robertson, Councilmember Zahn, Councilmember Lee, Barksdale, Deputy Mayor Noonhouse, Councilmember Stokes, and then myself. We'll limit our comments and questions to 3 minutes. And we'll start with Councilmember Robertson because she is a liaison to the Transportation Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. So first, thank you for the presentation, Andrew and Andrew. Number one, I am absolutely supportive of sending this to the Transportation Commission to study. I think that there's a lot of interesting aspects that need to be sussed out to decide whether, one, we should change the code with regard to personal use, but also whether we should engage and have the e-scooter use like we did with the Lime bikes. So the things that I would like to see, one, I think consistency with state law and across jurisdictional boundaries is really important. Safety is really weighing heavy on me on this. I've seen where these have been offered elsewhere, and people, it's not just they get injured. The injuries, some of the injuries are very, very severe injuries. And I worry about protecting the people that have them, but also if we have a on-demand use, generally we require the company to indemnify and defend us from any liability, but then the companies require the users to waive any damages against them in order to use these. And we could have people being severely injured on our streets and have no way to recover even their medical costs. So if they are not safe in general, we need to know that. So one, I want to know about helmets. Two, I want to make sure that they are, there's the riding on the streets and in bike lanes, and then there's riding on sidewalks. We want to make sure that as people are using these, they're safe for the riders, but they're also safe for the pedestrians and bicyclists who might be sharing space with them. The regulations on sidewalk speed is you can only go as fast as people are walking, but I've seen bicyclists flash past me on sidewalks not infrequently. So finally, I'd like to make sure that I want to look at the different types. I want to look at as far as the e-scooters, wherever they're parked and left, we want to make sure that they're not blocking ADA accessibility on sidewalks. We did see that some with the e-bikes. We might want to think about having a maximum speed for the shared scooters. And I'd like to have the Transportation Commission compare the different types. I've heard that the seating kind is safer. If there's a safer version, that'd be great. And how we might figure out how to get people to use helmets when they're in the shared scooter. Finally, I'd like the Transportation Commission to consider lessons learned from other jurisdictions that have the shared scooters, and also from lessons learned from Bellevue's experience with the e-bikes. So I think those are all things that they should study, and I'm looking forward to watching them go through it and being part of that and bringing it back to council at some future point. I'm really happy to see this. Micromobility is going to be part of how people get around in the future. So thanks.
Thank you.
My turn? Okay. Thank you. So I want to say that I agree this policy does appear to be out of date and needs to be updated. My sense is that time has changed from 2007, where we were engaging with the Youth Link Board to decide what the regulation should be, because it was really more of a recreation. And now we're really seeing that this is used by adults for mobility. So I saw it when we were on our trip to San Antonio, Dallas, DC, Santa Monica. And so I think there are lots of lessons learned from other cities that we can draw on, not even just locally, but broader, to understand what are some things that are important. I absolutely agree that this needs to be centered on Vision Zero. And that really looks at the entire interaction with all of the people to these e-scooters. And I also believe that it's really important to look at the cross city, because the likelihood that someone's only going to be on an e-scooter in Bellevue versus really understanding what other cities are doing. I know you listed Redmond as one of the neighboring cities that has this as a pilot. So I'm curious about, Issaquah, Kirkland, Renton. So really having a holistic view, I think, is really important, because I think it would be really confusing if you can be a 14-year-old and ride a scooter in Bellevue, but you have to be 16 to be riding in Kirkland. So to the degree we can partner with our neighboring cities, I think that's really important. And then I agree about the maximum speed. So it looks like at the state level is 15 miles an hour. So really understanding, do the machines have an organic maximum it can ride in so it's not a concern, or what can we do there? And then there is one that I was a little confused. Well, I will make one comment in that question. My comment is I like the list of priorities that were listed because I think it is very complete about safety and consistency and equity. So I appreciate the thoroughness of that list. And then my one that is a question is, you mentioned the state regulations versus the city, but it sounded like when you looked at the age, we were saying that we can actually have a more relaxed regulation than the state, which is normally not the case. So I just was curious about that. If there's no time to comment, maybe you can just send me an email.
Okay, Andreas, do you want to try to answer that, or should we send something back in writing?
Sure, we can answer it more thoroughly in writing, but the short answer is that we do indeed allow younger riders than the state's default, and that's specifically something that the state allows the city to either relax or tighten by ordinance.
So it was only the age, not a broad regulation relaxation. That's what I wanted to understand.
Is just the age. There are a few specific regulatory elements, age being one of them, where the local jurisdiction is authorized to modify by ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Excited to get this going.
Thanks.
Mayor, I believe you're on mute right now.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. I'm waiting. Yeah, the city council makes policies. We look at, what are the things that we want, and transportation is a system. It's very important to us. And we're looking at all the different ways to do it, especially when you talk about multimodal. And those connect with a lot of things, Vision Zero and so on. And lots of technology that's been developed. And so it is time that we do need to look at this, what do we call? Yeah, micro modal mobility, so on. Scooter, I think it makes sense. So I support that. And we are not Transportation Commission, so I'm not going to spend any time talking about what I think, what I know. I know somewhat this and that. I probably know a lot than others, and maybe know a lot less than others. So I hope this is all going to come out. I think the staff have presented the list of things, but it doesn't mean it's all inclusive. No, it's just the beginning of the conversation. So is our council's suggestion. So I would, go with the Transportation Commission and let them look at it with the council's direction. And hopefully, they will come up with all the questions that we want to ask. But along the way, we'll be able to ask more questions together with the staff. But it's just to be sure, it's not inclusive, all inclusive. It's not all exclusive. And it's just, looking at this as a good way to look at it. So thank you. I support it. I support the mover to the Transportation Commission and let them to look at this, understand it, and come up with either yes or no. If it's yes, the best part, the best system we have. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you, Mayor. So I also support the use of e-scooters and sending this to the Transportation Commission for study. I actually would also appreciate getting input from riders about how they expect to use the e-scooters. I actually bought an e-scooter, I just didn't get it in time. But because I expected to ride, I wanted to ride it from work to City Hall for council meetings. And so I think it's important to take into consideration those use cases so that we can make sure that whatever policy we come up with takes that into account. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Deputy Mayor Noonhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Andrew and Andreas. First of all, great overview and presentation there. And I too am supportive of moving this and directing the Transportation Commission to dive deeper into this issue about micro-mobility. A lot of great comments already from my colleagues. As I shared with you during our briefing, I think one of the great things about where we're at with this is that we've kind of already been through this process with the e-bike share. So I think that almost sets us a path, if you will, to follow some, I think, very smart and very thoughtful things that went into that share program, and taking into consideration a lot of the same issues that you're hearing this evening when it comes to safety, Vision Zero, when it comes to the aesthetics, to the parking, et cetera, et cetera. I think a lot of those same issues will come up. And I think you can address that in a thoughtful manner. As some of my colleagues have mentioned, I think it is important to look at some of the other regional cities in our area and how they've rolled out their bike share or bike share pilot. I think it also would be smart to look at other cities, those as well, most notably maybe Dallas, San Diego, Los Angeles, and others, and see how they rolled it out, because there have been some really great data coming out of those cities, really high usage. We'd love to know how large employers, have used them or encouraged their employees to use them, especially as it relates to that last mile, which is something that we're going to be, very focused on as we get light rail in 2023 here in Bellevue. How can we best make it easiest for these employees to get to light rail or another major transit station in order to get home or to get to work? So I think there's some things we can learn from that. But that outreach to large employers in Bellevue, that will also be something to really consider and to think about. But yeah, I'm excited about this moving forward, and all those safety and aesthetic issues aside, I think there's a lot of good stuff here for the Transportation Commission to look at and to work on, and to get more consistent with what the state is defining as e-scooter usage. So I look forward to this coming back, and look forward to hearing what the Transportation Commission comes up with. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I think I'm all in favor of it. It's I think we've talked about all the obvious things, and it's again, we've gone through this process before. It's set up very well. I really appreciate the effort by staff to put this together, and it's exciting to see this move forward. I was a couple years ago in Santa Monica. We had a good experience of watching this and seeing what happens and how it works, and it's just one more step in providing more multimodal transportation. And I have full confidence in the in the Transportation Commission, and that's why we have commissions, to really go over this, ask the questions, do the study, do the work, and come back with recommendations, and have check-ins on this. And it's very exciting. The only question I have is, I assume that one of the things that we'll be looking at is where we have leeway with the state law. I mean, sometimes we have to mesh those things in there, and I'm sure they'll bring those back when we have those questions. But I'm excited about it, and I think it's very heartening to hear that the business community is also interested in this as well. So it's a win-win at this point. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I too do support moving this to the Transportation Commission. I have a few things I'd like them to consider when they receive it. One is, I hope they do a field trip and everybody experiences the scooter, because as Councilmember Zahn said, it's, unless you've tried it, it's hard to appreciate the value or what you need to be careful of with them. I'd also like them to consider limiting where the scooters go, the shared scooters go. I know that my husband and I were, oh my goodness, hold on. Okay, my husband and I were in France riding scooters, and we got to some plaza and the scooter just wouldn't go anymore because it had an internal mapping system that disallowed the scooter from going in certain parts of the city. And so my thought is, I'd really like to look at having areas where scooters are used and areas where scooters, the shared scooters, are limited. And I also want to look at, consider, should we limit it to where we have the bicycle infrastructure? Because there are some parts of the city that would be really conducive to safe scooter riding, and there's other parts of the city that really are not, because we don't have our bicycle infrastructure in yet. So either thinking of letting them ride on sidewalks in those areas, or just limiting them to where we have the infrastructure. And then I'd like them to consider whether we should do any kind of registration for people if there's some sort of a knowledge test they have to take and be trained on the rules of scooter riding in Bellevue, so they can get a permit or something to operate one, just to consider that. And I do like Councilmember Barksdale's comment on asking the people who are going to be using the scooters what they'd like to use them for. So thank you very much. And let's go ahead and take a vote on this. Deputy Mayor, do you have a motion?
Certainly. I move to direct the Transportation Commission to work with staff to review and recommend revisions to the city code regulating the use of motorized foot scooters in Bellevue.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next on our study session, our next item, Mr. Miyake.
Then the next item is the preliminary budget. And Mayor, good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. And I'm very pleased to submit to the council for your consideration the preliminary 2021-2022 operating budget and the city's 7-year capital plan. To begin with, I believe it's really important to note the difficulty of the times that we're living in right now. The impacts of COVID-19 pandemic have literally upended all of our lives, and developing the budget during the pandemic was no small feat, and it's the product of a lot of hard work by a lot of folks in the city. Overall, the proposed budget in front of you totals $1.7 billion and balances Bellevue's history of fiscal responsibility with the needs of residences and businesses during this very difficult time. This budget is definitely not a status quo budget and has been adjusted based on revenue projections reflecting the impacts of COVID. And while core services have been preserved, necessary service level reductions are included. And before I touch on some of those, I first wanted to emphasize about what's in the budget and what this budget accomplishment. This budget continues to fund the delivery of critical services in the areas of public safety, public health, and human services to protect our most vulnerable populations in our rapidly growing community, and continues to maintain and build upon the basic capital infrastructure of the city to prepare us to meet the growth challenges coming at the city. Overall, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that in terms of the utilities, there is a modest utility rate increase that's needed, which is driven primarily by wholesale outside costs, and also just as the city's development services rates to account for growth and meet its cost recovery objectives. So as you know, this budget was developed in the midst of a historically challenging times due to the pandemic's impact on our finances and its significant impact on our human service agencies. But if that were not enough, it's being developed during a time when we continue to be challenged from prior years with a structural general fund budget deficit where our revenue structures will not keep pace with ordinary inflation and growth demands. All told, this general fund deficit amounts to around $16 million annually, or $32 million for a 2-year period of time that we had to address to balance the budget. And this budget responds to this general fund deficit in 3 ways. One, through the use of cost containment measures. For example, we extensively cut any form of discretionary spending internally for things such as travel, training, temporary help, and consulting services. We also cut back on maintenance in some areas, but specifically not in areas that would impact the safety of our citizens or the long-term structural integrity of our asset. And these reductions will largely move the city towards more of a complaint-based response in areas versus a more proactive response. In the areas such as tree removal and non-safety sidewalk repairs, you'll also likely see some aesthetics impacts as well, such as the brownouts of some of the lawns and lesser frequency of mowing and weeding. The budget also, as promised to the council during the last budget discussions in response to the general fund structural budget deficit discussion with council, incorporates many cost containment measures that reduce the growth expenditures, most notably in the area of healthcare costs. It was our commitment to you when we raised this issue with you. The budget also eliminates several vacant positions and a minimal number of filled positions. 2, it uses some one-time measures to balance the budget. For example, we use some of our reserves to help balance the budget, but it continues to maintain our general fund reserve level at 15% pursuant to council policy, as well as the GFOA's best management practices. And to keep core services functioning in the general fund, this budget proposes to allocate temporarily for 2 years a greater portion of sales tax to the general fund from the CIP. And the budget also delays the opening of Fire Station 10 for 6 months. 3, this budget also includes a small increase in revenues. It assumes a 1% adjustment in property taxes and also assumes a small increase in our basic life support transport fees. So, but finally, the budget also includes some targeted investments. It increases human services funding. It increases funding for homelessness, increases funding for a cultural liaison program and equity training. It includes some targeted investments for like neighborhood congestion, Vision Zero that you heard about a lot tonight, and bolsters funding to help us prepare for the significant growth coming at the city. But having said all that, the preliminary budget in front of you this evening can best be described as a bridge budget, in that it uses one time and a number of short-term measures to balance the budget until the next biennium. In essence, this bridge budget accomplishes 2 objectives for us. It allows us to plan and course correct once we know more about how COVID will impact our finances longer term. And it allows us some time to work in earnest next year to work on the structural imbalance of revenues, failing to keep pace with inflationary costs, especially in light of this ongoing growth coming at us. You know, but despite all these challenges, I am quite confident though that the city remains committed to delivering high quality services to our public. Tonight begins that budget conversation with the council. The staff is very eager to take questions and suggestions from the council for how we can best focus on coming conversations over the next few weeks. You know, before I turn it over to Tony, Carr, our finance director, I'd like to take a moment to personally thank the city's leadership team, Tony Call and her team who pulled all this together, and all the employees of the city for their dedication and hard work in getting us here tonight. I'd also like to thank the members of the community for your very thoughtful feedback. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony Carr, our finance director, to begin the presentation. Tony?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members, it's nice to be back here in front of you this evening. Thank you for having us. Before I move on, I need to echo City Manager's thank yous. First to the LT, they've done a phenomenal job helping bring forward a balanced budget for you today, and to the budget office and all the other employees who have worked hard to prepare this for you. My thanks go out to them as well. So tonight is the first of 6 briefings to the council on the budget. Our goal this evening is to kind of present with you a broad overview of what's in the budget. Having 6 times in front of you will give us more time to get to the details. Tonight, we're going to focus in that broad space. It is information only. A couple of housekeeping issues as we get started. Since we will be in front of you every week for the next 6 weeks, we will be establishing a memory bank that will come back in your packet weekly. So either the questions you ask, well, if they're factual, easy to answer, we'll put them in the memory packet and be attached to your packet. If they need more explanation or they need presentation, then we'll use some of the time in the next 6 weeks to bring back full presentations to you. So as we get started, there's a path forward to getting questions answered a couple of different ways. So our agenda this evening, we will first spend a minute and talk about the calendar and all the actions it will take to finally adopt this budget in December. And we'll spend a little bit of time looking at an overview of the total budget, dig a little deeper into the general fund overview and some major adjustments. Both Director Singalakis and Director Shiosaki are here this evening to help talk a little bit about kind of the impacts the community might see. So we'll have them with us this evening. We'll finish our overview of the capital investment program and then repeat kind of the upcoming presentations that we envision over the next couple of weeks. So here's a view of our council calendar. It started back in June with the budget workshop. We've had 2 public hearings for this evening on October 19th as the preliminary budget. And then you can see the fact that we've got several weeks ahead of us with a public hearing on November 23rd and tentative budget adoption based on your direction scheduled for December 7th. And taking a deeper dive on what's going to happen over the next several weeks. Tonight is the city manager's preliminary presentation. Next week, Director Brennan will be here to talk about development services. On November 2nd, Human Services will be here. November 9th, Director O'Toole will be here to discuss utility rates. November 16th, Director Hagan will be here for fire inspection fee, and then we head into the public hearing. You will notice that each of these weeks has a section called Council Interests. So as we come back to you with questions, with the areas of interest that the council has, we have time, a flexible time in each of these evenings with you to make sure that we're getting to you the feedback that you're interested in, and not just kind of the routine things that we know we need to bring forward to you, all the rates, all the things that need your attention, but also areas of your interest. So we've got time on each calendar for that as well. Next slide, please. So in order to adopt the package this year, there are approximately 9 or 10 actions that are required. The list is here in front of you. You will have to set the 2021 development services rates, the 21 and 22 utility rates. You'll have the human services and the block grant ordinances in front of you. This year will be the first year that you actually implement a 2-year fire inspection fee ordinance. Historically, we've done them annually. The recommendation coming out of the last mid-buy was when we come back this time, we do it for 2 years. So that's in front of you this year. We have a small increase in basic life support fees. We will also need a substantial need ordinance this year. So by state law, if inflation is less than 1%, as the state RCW defines it, if we want to increase property taxes to the 1% property tax adjustment, we would need a substantial need ordinance, and we'll have that for you this year as well. The last time you did that was back in 2016, so it was just a few years ago. We will bank the property tax, and then we will set the property tax for 2021. And then, of course, the last thing that happens is you adopt the actual fund appropriation for each of the funds. So our total budget this year is $1.7 billion, which sounds like a whole lot of money. It is an actual flat budget over the last time we brought a budget to you. So back the 1920 budget also had a $1.7 billion budget. I think it's important that even though we show a 0% growth at that big picture, if you break it down into kind of the 5 buckets that we talk about in budgets, you will see a little bit of a different picture. So I'm going to start in the very far right, which is the capital investment funds, and work my way left. So the capital investment funds total $523 million for the years 21 and 22. In this look, it's only 2 years. When we get farther in the presentation, you'll hear a full 7-year look, but you appropriate for 2 years, you authorize for 7 years. So appropriation would be $523 million. It actually has a decrease in percent growth, and that's really due to project timing and not due to something else. So that's really due to project timing. Heading one box to the left, you go to the special purpose funds. That's predominantly our donations and debt funds, those types of things. We haven't issued debt in the last 2 years, so I would expect a very nominal change in those funds, and you can see that here. The center block, you will have specific presentations on. It includes development services and utilities. Development services will come back later, as well as utilities. These are both areas where the revenues that are generated in those areas can only be spent in those areas. So for instance, excuse me, I apologize. So for instance, water rate fees that people pay can only be spent for water type utilities. The fees that they pay for permitting or development services can only be used for development services. That's what you find in that center bucket. Heading to the next bucket over is our internal service and other operating funds. You'll see it's about $200 million, and you'll see that it's gone down by 6.3% growth. There's 2 major reasons why it's gone down. The first is our hotel, motel, transit-oriented tax is included in this area, and due to COVID, it has substantially reduced going into this biennium. So that's one piece of why that's gone down. The other piece why that's gone down is our health benefits have also decreased. So you see that here as well. So that's the good news that Mr. Miyake spoke about in his opening comments. That takes us to the general fund, which is the fund that has the greenest color of money and is most fungible money in the city. The general fund pays for about, I would say, 85% of the operations of the city. It includes everything from transportation to parks, police, fire. All of our municipal administrative infrastructure is substantially located in this fund. This is the fund that obviously has been impacted by COVID quite heavily this year that you've heard about several times over. It's $474 million, and over the biennium, it has a 2.3% growth. A little later in the presentation, you will actually see that 2021 has a decline or a negative growth, and 2022 has a bit of an increase. You'll see kind of the major impacts COVID's had across our city in these various funds. The other place I think that COVID's had an impact that's not marked here is in water, but in the general fund, transit-oriented tax, and of course in sales and B&O tax in the capital fund. The next slide, thank you very much. When we talk about operations of the city, people always ask, so how are we paying for the operations of the city? You know, you've got this very large budget, how are you going to pay for it? So this shows how much you pay for the operations of the city. You'll see about a third of it is taxes. Included in the tax numbers here is that 1% property tax adjustment. You'll see another chunk of money, about almost 30% of it is our utility service fees. And then the remaining portions are smaller pieces. So you have charges for services. That includes everything from our fire contracts to our parks programs, miscellaneous revenues, which is our court fees, investment interest, and it's a very long laundry list of things that go into that space. Our intergovernmental services, our state shared money, which we get for liquor and marijuana. And then you see a little bit of grants, and then a little bit of money comes from the capital investment program into our operating fund. And I think, next slide, please, KE. Thank you very much. And so the last slide I have for you today before KE takes a deeper dive into the general fund is to talk a little bit about our property tax distribution. I know all of you are quite aware, but sometimes our viewers at home may not be aware that when an average property tax bill in the city of Bellevue comes, the city of Bellevue receives about 10%, or if you count it in pennies, a dime of their total property tax bill. So as council considers making the 1% property tax adjustment, where that impacts is just in the city of Bellevue portion, or 10%. So $1 million homeowner would pay about $9 a year for that 1% property tax adjustment. With that, I will turn it over to KE to walk through some of the general fund.
Thank you, Tony. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayors, Council members, and City Manager. I will be walking you through the next few slides regarding general fund forecast. Let me start with a refresher of what the forecast looked like 2 years ago. When we adopted the 2019 and 2020 budget, we were aware of the structural imbalance between general fund revenue growth and the growing costs to maintain our services. This is mainly driven by the tax structure issue that's facing almost all jurisdictions in Washington state. State law caps our property tax growth at 1 to 2% annually. That's including new construction without voter approval. Property tax accounts for about 20% of the general fund. So even with revenues such as sales and B&O tax, they have stronger growth rates, but they do not compensate for the limited growth in property tax. The city had been preparing for this future challenge for some time. Your unanimously adopted 2019 and 2020 budget took the first steps to address this issue, including a 1% property tax adjustment and implementing fire inspection fee and engaging our employees on a healthcare cost containment strategy. As you can see on the second chart down here, the general fund forecast at that time showed the ending fund balance would not drop below 15% until 2023, which allowed us time to prepare and address the issue and even make modest investment to address city's growth in the near term. And then, as we were celebrating the longest expansion of US economy in history, COVID happened. COVID not only changed the city's 2020 financial situation, it has also changed the economic outlook for 21-22, and it also adds uncertainty in the future years. In the budget workshop on June 22nd, staff presented 3 planning scenarios. From June, when we developed those planning scenarios, to now, due to the slow reopen and recovery observed, our moderate plus recovery scenario that indicates a 16 million gap has become realistic. On this slide, you can see the current general fund forecast presented in the city manager's preliminary budget. The blue line on this chart shows the general fund expenditures, and the green line shows the general fund total revenue. The 2021 and 2022 preliminary budget includes a 1% property tax adjustment, as the city manager mentioned, in both years. We will be losing approximately $1 million per year for annexation sales tax expiration that reimburses us the service costs in the Eastgate area that we annexed in 2012. And it also includes a phased opening of Fire Station 10 in 2022 and 2023, phasing the costs between being implemented over those 2 years. As you can see on this chart, the COVID impact in 2020 is very substantial, as I highlighted in this red circle. It created a large gap between our projected revenues and budgeted expenditures. The city has taken swift actions and used multiple one-time measures to address this gap, including the city manager's request to departments to underspend their budget by a total of over $6 million. It also includes leveraging the CARES grant and use of reserves. And another thing that I want to mention on this chart is that although the preliminary budget is balanced in 21 and 22, the long-term tax structure issue still exists, and expenditures are still projected to exceed revenues starting in 2023. This slide is an any fund balance slide. It shows you the general fund reserves as a percentage of city's total general fund revenue. The city's current financial policy requires the reserves to be at least 15%. So you can see that we ended 2019 at around 23%. But in 2020, we must use part of the reserves that we intentionally built in prior years due to COVID. And the current forecast shows the fund balance will drop below 15%, starts in 2023, and the trend continues if no other actions are taken. On to the preliminary budget. The general fund totals $474 million over 2 years, and they're categorized by council's strategic target areas. One thing that I want to note on this chart is that safe community, which is broader than just police and fire, is a subset of high performance government, and it's the dotted area on this pie chart. With that, I will turn it over to Tony to walk you through the budget balancing.
It was a challenge to bring forward a balanced budget. As City Manager Miyake messaged in his opening comments, and as KE has just mentioned, we still have great certainty ahead of us. We did need to close a gap of $16 million annually, or $32 million over the biennium. And we do need to use some one-time options where it's possible. So we have time to buy time so that we can get more information and, if necessary, make course corrections at the mid-biennium. The budget before you also maintains people-facing services, as City Manager Miyake mentioned, public safety and human services. It focuses on maintaining existing staff and programs where it's possible. We did need to make some reductions, and we'll go through those in just a minute, and talk about where we did need to make some prioritizing discussions. And then, as with any community and with any budget, there are always areas as the community changes where we need to require some investments. And this budget is no different. It does have some modest investments. So there's no easy answers to find $16 million or $32 million over the biennium for balancing this budget. These 4 strategies add up to that $32 million over 2 years. I'm going to start with over in the corner where it says one-time bridge structures, and then I'm going to go clockwise and end up over in cost containment, which was the largest of the areas that we found to balance the budget. So one-time bridge structures, it's $15 million over 2 years. $9 million of that money is in 2021. $6 million of that money is in 2022. It comes from 3 basic areas: a continued drawdown of reserves down to the council policy of 15%. The sales tax allocation, We've moved $3 million a year or $6 million total for the short period of time of 21 and 22 from the CIP to the general fund to ensure core services remain. And we have rethought the opening of Fire Station 10, where Fire Station 10 will have its full opening in 2023 in the springtime. And yet in 2022, Chief Hagan has found a way to do a soft opening in 2022. We will have to hire some team members, firefighters in 2022 and some in 2023. We actually have increased revenue options by about $3 million over the 2 years. And there's a couple of ways that money has come in. One is we have assumed the property tax, 1% property tax adjustment, which is about, I don't know, $450,000 in any given year. This budget before you increases the basic life support transport services. That's our BLS transport services, our ambulance services fee, and that generates about $80,000. And then we have also added additional staff members in our tax division here at the city to ensure that we have compliance with our current B&O tax structures. As I mentioned, there are several areas that needed investments across the city. It's $2 million over the 2 years. Again, not a tremendous amount. There was some needs there. First is in homelessness. We've moved to 24/7 homelessness shelter work, and that's included in this budget. We have small increases in equity and establishing a cultural liaison program. And then we've added team members in both community development and development services to assist with supporting the affordable housing initiatives and making sure the planning work is getting done on the timelines necessary. The last area that I bring to your attention is the largest. It's our cost containment or our change in operations, and it's $16 million for the 2 years. This represented 50% of our total reduction that we needed to make in the general fund. There's 3 buckets that fall into this. The first is our internal operations. So as City Manager Miyake mentioned, we have reduced discretionary travel and training. We've looked at ways that we could reduce our consultant money, anything that kind of gives us that flexibility to be able to take on new work. We have really looked hard to make sure that we have found as much there as possible before impacting external services. We've also have a second bucket, which is our COVID bucket. We know that COVID has changed our operations. By the time City Hall opens, based on what I read in the newspaper this morning about a potential vaccine, it's not going to probably open till we hit phase 3, which is probably going to be a while yet. By the time that happens, City Hall might have been closed as much as a year. And our citizens are finding new ways to access us besides coming to the building. So this budget does look at what are some of those ways that we can change our operations. I think it's the beginning point of how our operations are going to change. I think that over time, as COVID becomes maybe more part of our past, there'll be more changes in how the city operates in response to the pandemic. The last piece that's in our cost containment or our change in operations is those things that are external facing. And I'll turn this over to Director Shiosaki to talk in just a second here, but there's 2 major areas that we talked about from an external area. All are related to maintenance. We really prioritized how we serve people over doing maintenance. So both in sidewalk maintenance and in park maintenance. So with that, I'm going to turn the next slide over to Michael Shiosaki, who can speak more about the park maintenance impacts.
Thank you, Tony, and good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council members. For Parks and Community Services, I'll provide a high-level overview of these specific cost containment or operational changes, and these are the primary proposed maintenance reductions we're facing during these really challenging times. So these reductions are predicated on making sure that safety issues continue to be addressed first, and the cuts primarily have impacts on aesthetics, and that means a generally less manicured landscape that you'd see in parks and in streetscapes. And I'll go into this more in just a moment. So first, for streetscapes, we are proposing to eliminate the seasonal turf irrigation and thus reducing mowing of these landscapes. So the impact you'll see here, and you can see it in the photograph there, I'm sure it's something you've seen before. This would be turf that will seasonally brown out or go dormant. So this assumes that the turf will partially recover with fall rains, but unfortunately turf does generally degrade over time with this kind of treatment. So this includes about 9 acres of lawn and streetscapes. In addition to this, the reduction includes less frequent weeding and litter and leaf pickup, and a reduction in street tree maintenance. And there would be no funding for renovation projects in the streetscape out of CIP projects, so no mulching or plant replacements or non-routine pruning or drainage work. So overall, this reduction in street maintenance is about 19%. So moving on to neighborhood parks and city facilities, and this covers the city's 42 neighborhood parks, City Hall, BSC, the fire stations, and the training center. We would also be eliminating seasonal turf irrigation at these sites and then reducing mowing at neighborhood parks by about 25%. So the impact once again here is browned out turf in the summertime. We'll also be looking at reducing contract maintenance frequencies by about 25% in neighborhood parks and at city facilities. So the impact would be we'd work with contractors to reduce service levels, including mowing, weeding, litter pickup, edging, and fall leaf removal. For community parks and sports fields, and this includes the city's 22 community parks, we'd be looking at a reduction that's equivalent to about 4 limited term employees in maintenance staff. So this really is a level of service cut. And as we look at the entire maintenance staff, this in our resource management division, this would be at about 11% reduction. So this is a reduction in core maintenance functions like mowing and weeding and edging. So what you'll see over time is, longer grass in the non-summer season and perhaps a few more weeds, and just slower response time when there are down trees that aren't safety issues, and any added garbage pickups or repairs. So there'd also be a reduction in materials and supplies that go to community parks, about a 40% reduction. And so this means less bark and mulch for planting beds and top dressing lawns, and also less gravel for trail maintenance, and fewer small drainage projects. As we look at both community and neighborhood parks, this together would be a reduction of about 5 to 6%. And last but not least, in natural areas, we would be looking at eliminating 2 seasonal forest management staff positions, along with fewer supplies and professional services, meaning quite often design and contracted site maintenance that supports these natural areas. And then also looking at eliminating the Parks Department's Well-Kept Crew program, which is a summer youth employment program. And it would be eliminating that program in 2022 because we have some King County funding to keep that program together through 2021. So overall, in natural areas, those reductions would be about 3%. So now I'd like to hand this off to Andrew Singalakis in transportation.
Oh, thank you, Michael. And I want to acknowledge that we have Mark Poe, the Assistant Director of Traffic Management, also on this call. And while there are cuts throughout the entire transportation department in terms of vacancies that will not be refilled, the biggest part of our discretionary maintenance and operation budget comes out of our $15 million per year out of the department's operating budget for maintenance. This is why most of the proposed budget reduction is coming from maintenance. We are proposing a deferred maintenance strategy to accomplish this, reduce our budget in most of our major programs without totally cutting any one program. And this is because they are all really essential programs. Much of the savings in these areas is accomplished by eliminating a majority of the temporary help, as well as less contracted maintenance. And this shifts the burden onto our permanent staff. We'll still be able to systematically provide maintenance throughout the city at a reduced level, and also have the capacity to shift resources between programs to address concerns as they arise, and we'll need to become more reactive than proactive. And as indicated in these slides, and you can switch the slide at any time, the major programs are paving and potholes, sidewalks, vegetation control, street lighting. And there's an interesting thing about street lighting. We have a program to institute LED lighting by the end of 2021. And this is actually achieving a $200,000 a year cost savings, which is a positive. Signs and striping and signal maintenance. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tony.
Mayor, I will turn it over to you for questions. And up next after this is the capital investment program.
Okay, so this is one of two pauses in the program to ask questions. So I'll go ahead and first of all, can I see a show of hands if you have questions or comments, so I get a sense of how many people want to question or comment at this time? So let's just go by hands raised then. Councilmember Zahn, why don't you start?
There we go. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Tony, for all your work to present us with a balanced budget that still preserves the 15%. I know that this is a really tough time, and I really appreciate the work and also how to reduce the impact to the community. The couple of questions that I have for when you come back, the pie chart that shows the percent of dollars going to the different council priorities, I think it's important to have transparency to the pie chart. So those areas that are 20% or higher in the chart, it would be nice if it could be disaggregated so we can see what it goes to. So the 20% was the built and natural environment, 61% to high performance government. So getting some disaggregation or a pull out sub pie chart would be helpful to me. And then regarding the parks, Director Shiosaki, I would like to, I'd like to talk about whether there's some way to look at partnerships on the streetscapes, maybe an adopt the street program or adopt a park so that we can engage with the community to do some of that, maybe weeding and beautify our parks. And then on the well-kept crew program, I understand that we only have funding for 2021. I think it is very important to keep programs that engage with our youth. So I would like you to take a look at what it would take to be able to keep that program in 2022. And maybe it is doing something in partnership with the community to see what could be done. So those are my comments. I really appreciate the work so far, and I look forward to further engagement.
Any other questions or comments?
Madam Mayor.
Can you raise, whoever is interested in questioning or comments, just raise your hand so I can see. Okay, so go ahead, Councilmember Lee. And then I saw Deputy Mayor Noonhouse, and I saw Councilmember Stokes as well.
Thank you. I want to also thank the staff, Tony, and all the other department staff for working so hard, going through this tough time. You know, facing shortfall in budget and trying to make choices, it's always tough, especially something unanticipated. So anyway, so again, kudos. There's a lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff to think about. And I appreciate the city manager and staff working to come up with different ways to handle the deficit. You know, but again, sometimes it comes down to just what's workable, what's practical, and what's, you know, the different choices you have to make. So I don't want to take the time to go through a lot of stuff because I do have some questions. So I would love to spend some time to look over the PowerPoint, the presentation, and maybe, you know, I can come back with some questions after I have a chance to look through and maybe talk to the staff a bit. So that's all I can say. Yeah, so if I can have that opportunity, get back to me and I will be happy to give my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. And I think that we can all email any additional questions that we have, and those will be compiled so that and presented back to us so that we can see the questions and the answers for all the council members. Okay, so next I have Deputy Mayor, then Stokes, Barksdale, and I am assuming Councilmember Robertson has something she'd like to ask or say. So Deputy Mayor Newhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Boy, a lot here, and excuse me. First, really want to thank the leadership of our city manager, Brad Miyake, for getting us to this point of presenting this preliminary budget, as well as the entire leadership team, as well as Tony. Just fantastic job on not only briefing before this, but also walking us through this with your team as well. Clearly, a lot of thought went into this during a time that is so unprecedented as you've mentioned. So, and on that note, boy, I hope that Bellevue residents certainly understand how lucky we are to have this team at the city that's been through a recession not all that long ago. And I think we can certainly all take key learnings from that back in the 2009, 2010, as well as the council members that we still have on this council. Such as Councilmember Lee and Robertson, maybe Stokes as well. I apologize if I'm missing anybody. But that knowledge of getting the city through a time like this will also come extremely in handy. I really appreciate some of the core themes that I'm hearing tonight, because certainly for me, some of the top concerns that I have, certainly number one is keeping Bellevue strong. And, making sure that we don't let up on our COVID response, making sure that public safety is a key concern. And I'm hearing themes there, and I'm not hearing about any defunding of police or of fire. I'd love if we could find a way to not have that phased approach to Fire Station 10. Certainly, I know that some tough decisions need to be made here, but public safety is key. And, there's a reason we had to move forward with having a downtown fire station. So certainly would love we can take another look at that. Also, Tony, a quick question for you. And like Councilmember Lee said, I'm going to save most of my questions for email. But I'm assuming, and I apologize if I missed it earlier, but a lot of these forecasts that we see here so far, what are we assuming based on the recovery and how that's going to impact the different funds, impact the general reserves, impact the long-term forecast for the city? Are we looking at or hoping that it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, or how did you play into that as we're going through this? And then how nimble are we, or can we be in terms of adjusting as we go forward, depending upon how the recovery goes?
So Deputy Mayor, I'm going to answer that really quickly, and then I promise to get to a more full write-up answer to you that will answer the whole host of the questions you asked.
Thank you.
But in general, the easy answer is we have assumed a recovery that gets us out to 2023, and by 2023, we look a whole lot like 2019. So we're expecting us to be in a more of a U-shape, for lack of a better word, recovery for quite a bit. We did, in this budget that we just presented to you, include some one-time structures that help us bias the time in order to really see how that recovery happens. If it happens like we think it's going to happen, we might have to take more difficult choices come at the mid-buy. I think that's a very real possibility. If COVID comes back and we get feeling a little better, then we've used that one-time money very wisely. So that's kind of the big answer, and I promise to get you a more full write-up in the next packet for you.
Perfect, thank you. Two other areas I'm interested in that don't have to be answered tonight, but I just will be on the record. One, the $2 million for homelessness and affordable housing. I'd really like to know specifics in terms of where that's going. Clearly, that's not enough to address the issues going on, but I'd like to know specifically where that's going and how that's going to impact those two areas. And then also our challenge to our Director of Parks and Community Services here regarding litter pickup. For me, it's more than just an aesthetics. It's also an environmental impact. And I'd love to find a way that, I don't think anyone has a problem here in terms of, reducing mowing and other things, but that litter can really play, unsightly aspect of the city as well as an environmental impact. So I just wanted to pass that along as well. Thank you for my time.
Okay, Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I appreciate a lot of the deputy mayor's comments on this. And I won't repeat those. One thing I wanted to know, and just say it again in terms of with the public, is basically what's the difference between the budget you're presenting and what we potentially would have presented had there not been for COVID? Just so we get some context.
Sure, Councilmember Stokes. I would tell you that the budget you would have seen if it had not been for COVID, we would have still had that structural deficit. I'd have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but my gut, which I know maybe not be all that great, but I'll give it to you anyways. My gut tells you that it was been somewhere in the $2 to $4 million range. But we can get you an exact answer written up. But a large portion of this is related to the fact that we did hit a COVID recession. But we still would have had to make some choices coming into this budget because we did know that the future showed that expenditures would outstrip revenues.
Yeah, I think this is a very important message for the community to understand as we go forward, because this is, we're looking way into the future. The other one I wanted to just ask again for information and to kind of frame things is, again, explain, real shortly, but what is the importance of holding to the 15% reserves in terms of our overall budget, financing, and all these different factors? Because it would seem easy to dip into that in this type of situation.
Sure, we can get you a fuller answer written up on that, but the general response is that we hold those reserves in case of we need them again for yet another major issue that comes at us. So there's some need to have money in the savings account under any scenario so that we don't have to make rash, difficult decisions on the fly. So we'll get you a fuller write-up on that, though. Not a problem.
Okay, and isn't the other part that it has something to do with our bond ratings and things like that?
Oh, sure. Yes, of course. You need to have money in the bank in order to keep our bond rating going. Yes.
Right, right. Okay, the other, it's more of a comment, and I kind of follow on a couple of things or one thing the deputy mayor said, but I remember talking to Patrick Foran back in 2008, was the Parks Board, and doing with that campaign for the Parks levy. And we had to do some cutting back at that time on budgets and on the maintenance of the parks facilities. And I know it's necessary, and I know it's something that can be done fairly easily and save a substantial amount. But there is this factor that kind of worries me, is that one of the things that makes Bellevue or any city really look good and be attractive, and people feel good about the city and people feel good about themselves is you have a city that, it's a city in the park that's beautiful. We have it well maintained. There are problems in other cities where they have potholes, where they let things just go. So I'm a little concerned that we don't, that we take this very carefully. And what Patrick said also was that it is very, very difficult usually to come back to a standard once you lower the standard. So I'm hoping we're aware of that and try to maintain the beauty. And people are going through a time period when they're really feeling bad about things. And I think having the city look great is important. So I'm just, that's a balance there. And the other factor is I'm a little concerned about the loss that people that have been working, particularly part-time and all, they're going to be out of a job. and that's a little concern too, and what that effect is. But I understand we have to make these. I guess I'm saying I trust that you're making a balance on that, and that it's a hard thing to do, but let's make sure we recover and get back to that level as soon as we can. That would be my request on this part. A great presentation, and I'm really looking forward to the details and going forward on this. But up to this point, it's been right what we needed. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Tony, and staff for the great presentation and all the work that you've done to put this budget together. Just a few points here. So in terms of having moved to more remote work, just curious about any savings that we've had there and how we're working to carry those forward into the future and continue to look for ways to learn from these and solidify a bit more enhancements there. In terms of the cultural liaison program, I was curious about what that entails, but probably a bit more importantly from my end is just an ask for us to consider dedicated resource or staffing for racial equity, so that training is sort of a touch and go. I'd like to see a role that is a bit more sustained throughout, so that can work with the different departments to apply an equity lens and build that muscle throughout the city. In terms of tech enhancements, just thinking about ways that we can, as you know, I'm into the data piece of things. And so the more that we can build up that muscle as well in order to identify efficiencies where we can make adjustments based on what we're seeing in terms of programming. And then finally, just two things. One, community involvement. I really like the idea of having the community involved in helping to work through some of the park maintenance, things like that came up earlier. As well as just looking for ways to apply tactical urbanism throughout the city. I think it can help us with remedying some of those. And then my last question is, when will we have a discussion or review the KPIs that are also in the budget? And just curious when that conversation will happen.
Councilmember Barksdale, I've got your list of questions here, and I will talk with the city manager and the city clerk on the KPI discussion.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great, Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks, Mayor. Great presentation. Really appreciate having such excellent finance people at the top with Brad and Tony. I think that will serve the people of Bellevue very well. First, I am happy to see that many of the core governmental services are being maintained, like police and fire and roads and parks and utilities. I think that's all really, really important, especially since our city is continuing to grow and the people expect to get really good governmental services. I join my colleagues' concerns about wanting to make sure that the maintenance that we are deferring doesn't become permanent, that it doesn't, and that it doesn't cost us more. So, for example, we wouldn't want to delay overlaying a road to the extent that we need to then do a whole new subgrade. And I know that this is something we've talked about in our briefings, but I wanted to just talk about it on the record, because that's going to cost a whole lot more and inconvenience the public a lot more than just maintaining it. So allowing some things to slip that don't then end up costing more, penny wise and pound foolish, my mother always said. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we, if we're cutting some pennies, that we don't end up paying a bigger price down the road. Secondly, I want to make sure that the deferrals of the maintenance aren't front door kind of things. When we went through the recession before, for example, we weren't cutting the sides of the roads, and that really didn't look very good. And having your front door be bashed in and wholly makes your whole house look bad, right? So these are the kind of things that people are really proud to live in Bellevue. They're proud that we have beautiful streets and amazing parks, and it creates value in our community. It creates investments from individuals and businesses. And it's one of the things that makes Bellevue a standout community. And so making sure that things that we are trimming or deferring aren't those front door kind of things, I think is really important. Finally, I want to make sure that we continue to do the things we need to do to set ourselves up for the COVID recovery, for the economic growth, for all the jobs that are coming. So for example, spending some money on design. Now this is where this is bleeding into the capital, but spending money on design so that we're eligible for grants. Excellent. Looking for planning grants. For example, King County with their Pennies for Pools program, they have planning money available for grants. We have a pool that we're studying. Definitely we need to be looking for those kind of things. So, but we probably need to do a certain amount of work in order to get it. So making sure that we can get ourselves ready for grants and partnerships is really, really important. And I love the idea of partnering with our businesses and our individuals and our nonprofits and our community organizations, Adopt a Park, Adopt a Road. I think that those are all things that make people feel great. If, you know, when we had the mayhem that happened on May 31st, the community really came together to clean up downtown. That made our community stronger. And there's a lot of people that felt great about that and who would feel great about making sure that they make Bellevue a better place for everyone. So I think communicating about it so people know what to expect, but also inviting people in to help, I think would be a really good way to go. So thanks.
Thank you. So I'm just really impressed with what a thoughtful budget this is. And it, you know, it's a nimble, responsive budget to a most unique time in our city. And even though we've been through recessions before, this is very different than that. And so I appreciate how responsive this is to the emerging needs of the community. And I know, you know, we have to cut back. We have increased needs and we have decreased revenues. And both those lead to necessary cutbacks. So I really do echo my fellow council members' thoughts in creating volunteer programs to maintain some of those areas that we're going to have to decrease the maintenance of. Certainly we can have volunteer groups doing weeding and raking. And I know we've seen amazing volunteer programs in the city before, so I'd love to explore that. I would like to, when we talk about the lighting program that we're going to have to kind of stop for a little bit, in terms of Vision Zero, those intersections and those roadways that do not have the LED lighting and do not have the bicycle infrastructure, that is just double trouble. So I would like to at least prioritize replacing the lights to the brighter LED in the areas of the city that do not have a safe bicycle infrastructure or pedestrian infrastructure. We've seen, I think, 3 incidents already in a short period of time where we've had fatalities and serious injury due to decreased lighting. So it just doesn't seem like that's a prudent area to cut back. I do appreciate Councilmember Barksdale's recommendation on equity staff, and I wonder if perhaps part of our diversity staff can work with that, or if there's some combination there. Let's see. If we're going to be kind of doing some of the maintenance on demand, I really hope we promote the My Bellevue app and make it really easy for people to report holes in the road and tree limbs down and unsafe situations. And then the last thing I'd like to ask is the new sales tax that we implemented last week that's going to be bringing money into our affordable housing program. Does that allow us to take that money out that we've allocated to affordable housing out of the budget and put it somewhere else now that we have a new source for that funding? So that's just my one question.
We certainly can get back to you on that. I do not believe that you can supplant much of those fundings, but I will certainly check with the legal department and get you an answer back on that.
Great. Okay, and so we will move on to the next section, but please do write down all your questions and let's submit them by email to staff, and then we can all see each other's questions and answers next week. Okay, go ahead, Tony, continue, please.
Certainly. The next section of our evening is the capital investment program. I think this is just about 6 or 7 slides, so it's not going to take us too long. We'll have one more question area after that, and then after that, we will close down with just a recap of where we're headed over the next several weeks. I'm going to turn this over to Kate Elu to present.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. The next section of the presentation is for the city's 7-year capital investment program, focusing on the general CIP. So the total CIP includes general CIP and the utility CIP. We're only focusing on general CIP tonight. Utility CIP is scheduled to come back on November 9th as the utilities department present their rates and their CIP. In the next 2 slides, we will go over the major investments within the CIP. By our financial policy, first, we need to ensure that the city meets our debt obligations and maintains the project we already built. So this includes the overlay program and other transportation maintenance programs. It also includes parks renovation and refurbishment. It also includes the maintenance of Fire Station 10 and other city facilities, including City Hall and BSC. And also we need to maintain investment in affordable housing. We started to include $2 million per year for affordable housing in CIP since the last budget. It continues with this budget. It also continues improvements in neighborhoods. It includes the neighborhood enhancement program that funds small and medium-sized projects in neighborhood areas. The neighborhood partnership program that helps building small community-based capital improvements. It also increased funding for neighborhood congestion management project for $1 million in total. It also continues our TIFIA projects in Bellevue area, including the next segment of the Spring Boulevard that has just opened. It also addresses city's growth. The CIP includes the design and right-of-way acquisition for Bellevue HOV lane, Bellevue Way HOV lane. It continues to build Fire Station 10 and the economic development plan implementation, which is a 3P project that totals $1.5 million over 7 years. This CIP also continues our 3 voted levies, including Parks Levy, Fire Levy, and Transportation Levy. Parks Levy expires in 2028. What's left to build in the CIP is the Airfield Park. The fire facilities and transportation levy passed in 2016. They will continue to build various projects throughout the life of the levy. If you're interested, you can find a very cool map on page 320 of the preliminary budget book that shows the locations of all the transportation levy projects that has been built and is planned to be built in 21 and 22. The CIP also funds for our current and future financial system. It also continues our smart city initiative. In addition, it adds roadway improvements and pedestrian bike improvements as part of the Vision Zero project. It also funds for the growth corridor bike network implementation. Furthermore, it fulfills general government obligations. These aren't the most noticeable projects, but they are important to maintain the city's operations. It funds for example, city fleet in-ground lift replacement. It also funds for parks resource management facility, replacing the aging fuel tanks for the city fleet. On this slide, you can see the CIP has added new projects and they can be sorted into 2 major categories. One is to address the city's growth, and the second is to fulfill general infrastructure obligations. I will not go through these projects one by one, but I want to highlight 2 projects. One is the funding the first phase of the Vision Zero safety projects along high injury network corridors. The second one is the grant match project with transportation. It allows us to leverage grants opportunities when they come. By funding transportation, by funding this program, we can meet the minimum requirements for any local match. So if you want to know additional information about any of those projects, we can definitely provide those as well. The next two slides shows the total 7-year CIP distribution in two ways. The first way is by project type. What you see on this pie chart, we distributed CIP by debt services first. This is the upper right slice of the pie. It's pretty straightforward. It pays for our debt obligations. Below it is the ongoing maintenance. The ongoing maintenance is about half transportation and about a quarter parks. And then we have the discrete ongoing programs that half of it is transportation, and majority of those transportation projects are TIFIA projects. And then the last slice is the levies. That funds are 3 of our voted levies, including fire, parks, and transportation. That accounts for about 21% of our total CIP. And then the second pie chart is showing CIP by strategic target areas. As you can see, the transportation and mobility accounting for the largest share, and then followed by high performance government and high quality build and natural environment. With that, I will turn it over to the mayor for questions and comments.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm just going to go ahead and call on people in this order: Councilmember Barksdale, Lee, Stokes, Robertson, Zahn, Deputy Mayor Newhouse, and then myself. So Councilmember Barksdale, would you like to begin?
All right, thank you, Mayor. And thank you again, Tony and KU and staff. So I just have one quick question. In terms of East Main and Wilburton and the Grand Connection and East Trail, are all those still accounted for in the CIP? I just wanted to make sure that those were still funded.
The Grand Connection is definitely, I missed the other two projects you mentioned, but the Grand Connection, the early implementation still exists in the CIP. Yes, it does. In fact, it actually adds a couple of years of funding for 26 and 27.
And the other two were East Main and Wilburton, just East Main.
Wilburton is still included in the CIP. I'm not sure about East Main. I'd have to look at the terminology of your terminology versus what I'm thinking it might be. So I'll check into that to make sure we've got the right terminology on that.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Similar questions. I assume that the current CIP, I don't see any changes, right? So they will continue.
Yes, sir, they do continue.
Okay, so what you pointed out is just maybe additional projects that you want to add to the new CIP for the next CIP. And so, right? Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And so I feel good because, you know, this is something we're looking at into the future. I assume that, you know, COVID-19, as far as I can see now, really hasn't stopped everything. And when things get better, you know, I think we would have even more opportunities and projects. And I noticed that most of it, a lot of it is on transportation, smart cities initiative, technology, and they're all related, you know, zero emission, transportation. I think that's good. I think it's very, very uplifting in a way. My question is, because we have the COVID-19, you know, we are taking a hit in the operating budget. We're making lots of priorities, you know, which we just went through the first part of the presentation. And I know CIP has opportunity to shift money around, like you mentioned, because the money is big numbers. We're talking about big chunk of numbers. If it's a timing issue, you know, we can actually have opportunity to manage, you know, our financial problems like deficits and so on in the short run. So is there any of that done here in the current existing projects, or they're just going to go? Yeah. So my question is, what is potentially some shifting of timings saving that we can use to do more, do less, or even, well, I know we're shifting some more sales tax to the operating budget. Well, the question I'm asking basically is, can we not shift some a little bit more so that we don't need to have all the agony of trying to cut the operating budget?
Good.
It's a mouthful, okay?
Good.
If you answer me some, answer some. But I think, again, same with operating, I would really love to enter into some of that, conversation, whether it even be philosophical or specific, but I think that would be helpful to me. Thanks, Tony.
You're very welcome, Councilmember Lee. We will get that teed up for you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, very good overall presentation. I'm looking forward to getting into more detail on this. And actually, I was having the same thoughts that Councilmember Lee had. Is we're looking over here, parks operation and maintenance, 12.6 million, and we're talking about letting grass go brown and things, and not keeping up appearances that actually I think have a lot to do with people's perception of the city. And I'm glad we're building these things, and I think it's very important that we push these forward because we are going to come out of this pandemic. We are going to go forward, and these are important things for the future. I'm not questioning that. I'm just, again, it seems a little odd just to take the cuts out of the operating budget and not in the CIP in a sense. I know from past discussions of these things, there is a lot of moving around that's done in these projects, and they're long range and all that. We're talking about just earlier talking about maybe suggesting about doing something about even taking the affordable housing thing out and trying to do something else with it. We're only talking to 2 million at affordable housing. We've got 4 million for a parking lot. I know sometimes you look at this and I just wonder if we're, well, I'm not sure where I'm going on this exactly, except it just seems that we should take a look at this and maybe have a little more balanced approach to addressing the shortfall overall. But there may be a rationale for not doing that, but I'd like to have that explored.
Councilmember Stokes, that's a very good question. And Councilmember Lee, you as well. I think you asked a similar question. We will definitely follow up. I think the CIP does have some areas where we have removed funding substantially from our maintenance. We took the inflation out. We will continue to kind of tie that up and bring that storyline back to you. I think it's a good conversation that we need to tee up, and I appreciate you bringing it to light. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. Couple of things in the CIP. As I said, when we were talking about the budget in general, I think that it's really important that we continue to fund things in bits and pieces so that we can leverage them later. And I am pleased to see that in the CIP presentation. So I know that I believe there is in the budget a curbside management study that is really important as our downtown grows. I am wondering if that curbside management study includes or could be modified to include a study on the downtown and Bellevue circulator. I think having a circulator that goes through downtown and Bellevue, it's like the shared scooters. It's one of those last mile kind of things. It's going to be really important as those 30,000 new jobs come on in the next few years. And it's going to be really important to have something like that up and running by the time light rail opens in 2023. And I know Visit Bellevue's working on it. I know the Chamber's working on it. I know the city's been hooked in with those groups. But we need to make sure that we at least have enough money, whether it's in this curbside management study or another line item, so that we can look at how it would be done, when it would be done, and how much it would cost, so that as we get closer to light rail opening, we can make those decisions. So, and we can maybe apply for grants for those sort of things. So I'm just going to put a pin in this rather than having Tony answer back. if this is not already in the budget, I'd like to know where it can go. And I'd like to know what the staff's estimate of it would be so that I can ask my colleagues to include it. Second of all, I want to make sure that there is, and you can answer this if you know it. I know we green-lighted some money for studying the pool, for studying the multicultural center. Where are those two items in the next budget?
Good question. I know that you currently have studies underway that came out of previous council contingency money, and I believe those studies are underway now. I'd have to look and see how they continue in the future. That's a nit that I don't know the answer to, but we can find out for you.
That would be great. And then one final ask, and that is with specifically with regard to parks. Our parks levy was passed in 2008. It's a 20-year levy, but there's nothing that says that we cannot ask the voters to replace it early. So we might want to think about that. I'm not necessarily in this budget cycle, but as we start living with the downside of this budget. So I think that's something we definitely need to think about. It was something that I think the Parks Board was going to study, like funding for the parks. And I don't know if they have, but that would be good. So thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I agree with making sure that we have projects that are in the growth-oriented area. And I understand the concern from my colleagues about spending CIP money that could be shifted over to general fund. I will just say that sometimes we have to leverage opportunities. And right now, the market is very competitive for construction, more so than we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years. And so to the degree that we can actually build more for our money right now, I think that's an important element we need to consider. The other one is, it was mentioned before about being shovel ready, because as a member of the National League of Cities Transportation, we have been advocating at the federal level for passing infrastructure package. And I think that when it finally moves, we want to be able to be positioned ourselves to be able to go after that money. So if we can get some of our projects under design and underway, we can actually leverage and get more dollars. And I would say that's true with continuing with our TIFIA projects as well, especially so that we can align it with when light rail opens, having more projects, and especially the ones that are really focused on Vision Zero, because as people come out of teleworking, we want to make sure that we have street modifications for Vision Zero that we're actively working on. And so that to me is really, really important. There was a comment made about 130 at TOD. I would really like to get a better understanding of whether we can do more with the TOD, look at an alternative for the parking stalls and move that forward. So perhaps that goes with the message earlier about, can we leverage some of our affordable housing 1590 sales tax dollars that we just passed? When is the bond funding going to be available? And what can we do to look at 130th? So is there a project out of that? And then I echo the comment about the cross-cultural center and the aquatic center, whether we can put some seed money in and get going on those two. And then lastly, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about updating the environmental stewardship initiative. And I'd like to understand whether there are some projects that can emerge from that, either from our municipal projects with our buildings or with our transportation and our fleet to look at more greener fleets. So I understand that we need to run a really tight budget, but I also think that we need to be true to our priorities and things that we've talked about with our community around advancing some of these other efforts. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Zahn.
Okay, great. Deputy Mayor Newhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, great continuation of the presentation and really great conversation by my colleagues here. I think I'm just going to hold off on the rest of my questions and email them and But really like the direction of the conversation, a lot of good questions, and I'll add to it by email. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I just have two questions that you can answer later, but one of them, you know, when we talk about how expensive the utility fees are in Bellevue, and just knowing the, you know, I heard this thing, I don't know if it's true, I'd love to know for a fact, that Costco's Kirkland toilet paper does not flush as well as other toilet papers and really costs the city a lot of money to process that. And I'm wondering if we could do some kind of city effort to educate people on lowering utility costs by being more careful about what they're putting down the toilets. And of course, with their recycling and things like that. And then the other question is, I'm not sure if it's this budget or not, but the 5 full-time employees for permitting, I believe for development services that we're adding, is it possible to add contract workers so that we're not committing to, you know, permanent employment for a temporary boom? It's just something to think about. Don't have to answer that. But I just want to say how much I appreciate everybody's comments tonight. I know that it's going to really change the way that we all look at the budget, and the next time it comes back, a lot of our comments and thoughts will be implemented into the presentation. And so I just appreciate the conversation here tonight. It's been very robust, and it's one of the first of 6. So we have a lot of opportunity to weigh in and to learn what's possible. So Tony, would you like to finish up here?
Sure. I just have a couple of just next step slides. And so if you could pass on to the next step. One more click, please. So we do have a couple of rate presentations coming up in front of you. Utilities rates, you can see generally what their total increases are in 21 and 22. Director O'Tall will be here. I believe it's November 9th, and she'll talk more. Most of those dollars are coming from wholesale and aging infrastructure. Development services will be in front of you next week. Director Brennan will be here, and he should be able to speak to your contract employee question, Mayor. You can see here that the rates are minimal, 1 to 4% depending on fee. We're not anticipating a change in fire inspection fee. We'll bring that back to you anyways. I believe that comes back to you on November 16th. And with that, the next slide, please, KE. And again, so here's what's ahead of us. We'll be ensured to make sure we save time to carve out to make sure you've got time to get your questions answered either through the packet or through verbal briefings. Send your questions in. We're ready to help you learn as much as you need to learn about the budget. We're here. Thank you.
Wow, great presentation, great discussion. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, we have a land use issue coming up here tonight with consideration of Puesta del Sol conditional use permit application. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce that?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Just by way of background, the matter in front of you is the Bellevue School District's application for conditional use permit to demolish the Bellwood Elementary School and construct a new school. This is a process 3 quasi-judicial matter, and tonight will be the council's initial consideration of this matter. Tonight, council is going to hear a brief staff report, and we'll have an opportunity to ask questions if you have any. No action is being sought by the council this evening, and staff will return at a future meeting tentatively set for November 2nd for a final action. Joining us this evening is Nick Melosinos, our Deputy City Attorney, as well as Liz Stead, the Land Use Director from Development Services. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nick to tee up the conversation and provide council information about this process. Nick?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Because this is a quasi-judicial matter, Mayor Robinson, I recommend that you give council members an opportunity to disclose on the record any ex-parte communications they may have had with the applicant or any others supporting or opposing the application. To most efficiently enable council members' disclosures, staff have searched all emails received at council@bellevue.gov and the individual council members' city email addresses. Therefore, council members need to only disclose any contacts received other than through city accounts. If any ex parte communications are disclosed, a council member should state on the record the name of the person who contacted you, the date or approximate date of the contact, the method of the communication, and the substance of the communication. Thank you, Mayor.
So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if any of you have had any ex parte contacts that you would like to disclose. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'll take that as a no. Okay, Mr. Miyake, do you want to continue with the
Well, we have
presentation?
next we have Liz Stead to provide a brief staff report.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and providing a brief presentation of the project for your background. One moment, please. So the project is the Puesta del Sol Elementary School, and the project is at the intersection 151st Place Northeast and Main Street. This is a conditional use permit. The PowerPoint that you're looking at right now is actually the PowerPoint that was presented for the hearing examiner at the public hearing on September 10th, 2020, and is part of the record that you have in your files. The Bellevue School District is requesting conditional use approval. This is a process 3 decision to demolish the Bellwood Elementary School and replace it with a new elementary school serving the Puesta del Sol community. The Puesta del Sol program is a Spanish language immersion school that draws students from all over the district. The proposed construction period for this is 2021. And they're looking at completion in 2022 for the project. There was also a critical areas land use permit associated with this conditional use permit. The CALUP was reviewed and approved back in March of last year, and at that time there were no appeals of this critical areas land use permit. So Puesta del Sol, as I mentioned, is a choice school, and it is they're trying to centrally locate the Spanish immersion program. They want to increase the program access and also create a community resource in the neighborhood. You'll see on your screen an attendance map. You'll see that where the red dot just south of I-90 is the existing Puesta del Sol site, and the orange dot toward the north is where they are proposing to construct the new school in the Kelsey Creek area. This is the existing Bellwood site. You can see where my cursor is located. This is the existing Bellwood school. To the west is Kelsey Creek, the orange line you see running through there. And this drawing is also denoting the critical areas that are on site and also to the west of the site. To the east and the north of the site is residential community. The existing Bellwood facility has been around for quite a while and is ready for an update. So it's kind of exciting to see this project coming through. But you can see that right now the project has been used. The school was used as a swing school. There have been multiple schools moved in there while other schools were under construction. So this would be the first permanent school in there for quite a few years. The project proposes to gain access for both parent traffic and some of the students to come in through 151st Place Northeast, which is to the south of the school. 151st Place Northeast currently acts only as a southbound egress from the school, so there would be a change in the ingress and egress would both come off of 151st. The ingress for the buses and teachers, staff would come in off Northeast 4th Place, which is at the northeast corner of the site. Northeast 4th Place is not being recommended for any sort of improvements at this time due to the existing nature of the street, and the school district will be working on the safe routes to school through that, and they are pushing most of the staff and students and walkers to cover access. The site alternative analysis, the school went through 7 different schemes. They really put a lot of time and effort into finding the scheme that was the most successful for all of the people using the site. The things they were really looking at were safety and operations, also neighborhood concerns, impacts to the environment, and also cost and schedule. Scheme 2 is this proposed site plan, which is the one that was ultimately approved by the neighborhood, by the school district, and also by development services. So in this, you could see at the northeast corner of the site, the buses will enter the site northeast 4th. They will do a roundabout and egress back off northeast 4th. And then parent and visitors will come in down at the south end. They will also do a loop and come around and move out. One of the basic tenets of trying to design these schools for site planning is to actually separate bus service and the normal users of the site. So they do find that that makes for a safer site plan. The site is, the proposal does comply with land use code development standards. It is in an R5 land use district. The site area is just under 10 acres and they're at about 18% lot coverage, 55% of impervious surface, and they meet all other criteria. They do have 151 parking stalls on site so that they can accommodate not only their daily need, but also the need for different event parking. The architectural plans are you can see the difference between what was there previously and what we've got today. But these architectural plans were based with the Puesta del Sol program in mind, and you can see that reflected in some of the color scheme. The Transportation Review Group has also given recommendation for this approval. In the Transportation Department does require that there are adequate public facilities for all modes of transportation. And the issues that were reviewed were traffic operations, including before and after school parent queuing, site access points and impacts to the surrounding neighborhoods, pedestrian bicycle facilities and safety, and also level of service for the surrounding street system. The site access opportunities on Northeast 4th Place and 151st Avenue Northeast were found to be the best options for the school. This is a view north on 151st Place Northeast. You can see that in fact, the street is minimally improved. So there is a plan to provide further improvements to access all of the right-of-way that is available on this street. This is a cross-section of how 151st will be completed. You can note that due to the neighbors' requests, we've been able to provide parking on both sides of the street so that the neighbors still have the parking that they desired. And then they will have 2 9-foot drive lanes. And the school district has been working with the neighbors and has letters of intent from all of the neighbors on 151st Place Northeast to allow access for construction. So they'll have some construction easements, but no permanent easements with this construction. This is a view west on Main Street. One of the other improvements that you will see as you review the project further is that we will be adding a left turn lane onto 151st Place Northeast from Main Street. Transportation did conclude that this proposal will provide sufficient access for development of the new school, and student, pedestrian, and bicycle access will be improved. We're going to be establishing a school zone and also adding a crosswalk and flashing beacon on Main Street to further facilitate that. And parent education will be provided prior to opening. We have a strong history in the past of working with the school districts to create a plan that is then transmitted to the parents. The conditional use decision criteria that we are looking at is at Land Use Code 2030B 140. A, the conditional use is consistent with the comprehensive plan. B, design is compatible with and responds to the existing or intended character, appearance, quality of development, physical characteristics of the subject property and immediate vicinity, and conditional use will be served by adequate public facilities, including streets and fire protection. Conditional use will not be materially detrimental to uses or property in the immediate vicinity. And lastly, the conditional use complies with the applicable requirements of the code. The recommendation that was transmitted from Development Services Department to the hearing examiner found that those decision criteria were met, and the hearing examiner has affirmed that in her recommendation to council. So that's the end of my brief presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Can you tell us what we can expect next on this? Like, when is it coming back to council and in what form?
Yes, it'll be coming back. It's scheduled to come back to council on November 2nd. And at that time, it would be considered a decision point where you would be making a decision. Nick, you may be able to elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, so it would be on November 2nd. And then at that time, like Liz said, it would be for the council's decision. And with regard to making that type of decision, since it's a process 3, the city council shall not accept any new information, written or oral, on the application, but shall consider in deciding upon the application the complete record developed before the hearing examiner, the recommendation of the hearing examiner, and comments of a community council with jurisdiction. As the site is located within the EBCC, that would be the comments of the community council that's being referenced there.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to go around and let everybody question or comment in this order. Council members Zahn, Stokes, Robertson, Lee, Barksdale, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and then myself. So Councilmember Zahn, why don't you start us off?
Mayor, I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Councilmember Stokes.
I don't have any questions either.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Robertson.
I don't have specific questions about the application. I've already read the hearing examiner's decision. I didn't see, maybe because I haven't looked at all of the exhibits yet, I didn't see any comments from the community council. Liz, were there any specific input or comments from the community council, or Nick, whoever?
Sure. Within the record, there is, I think, the agendas from the hearings that were done at the EBCC, and there's also some handwritten notations in there as well. But Liz can explain further what's within the record with regard to that.
As Nick mentioned, there are staff notes in the file that refer to comments that happened during that EBCC hearing. So you'll see that, and you'll also see some comments from citizens that reflect back to that EBCC courtesy hearing as well.
And are the minutes from that hearing in the record?
They are not in the record. Those were prepared by the city clerk's office, but were not placed into the record.
Okay, because we received them today, but I didn't look at them because I didn't know if they were in the record or not. Okay, so we should not look at those then.
Well,
right?
Councilmember Robertson, for the minutes that were received, those were actually the minutes that were approved from that meeting. And since one of the elements that the council can consider in determining whether or not to approve this is the comments of the community council, we would say that the minutes would reflect the comments of the community council.
So we can consider those even though they weren't in the record. All right, I just wanted to check before I read them. Yeah. Don't want to run afoul of the rules. Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any questions.
Oh, I think I missed Councilmember Lee.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Looks like a very nice project. I have a question. What's the zoning south of the property?
It is also zoned R5 to the south of the school district.
Okay, I see R4, R2.5, but south of it is R5, huh?
I believe so. I could confirm that with.
Okay. I don't know, but yeah, okay. Yeah, at least it's not as restrictive as R5, for example. I mean, I would not want it to be R3, R1, R2, and then it may not be compatible. It's sticking too far south to the general area, but it may have come through your land use
But it's a
analysis
school,
anyway.
it's a school
So
already.
yeah, but anyway, regardless, that's just my question. If yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Noonhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, it's just two quick questions, and appreciate the presentation tonight. So one, there was no appeal to the hearing examiner's decision. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then on the traffic mitigation, and I know there was extensive outreach with the neighborhood there, but what I noticed in the packet was that potentially constructed would be a 1 to 3 story. So obviously that would impact the amount of students, and that would impact the number of cars, et cetera. So were those different scenarios looked at in terms of if it would be a three-story building or a 1-story building, and how that could impact the traffic?
Sure. So when we looked at the project is approved for a certain number of students. That number of students is in the approval, and you'll find that in the staff report. And when we talk about it being 1 to 3 stories, it was actually meant to say that some of the areas of the school are 1 story, and there is one area that has 3 stories. So it's still the same project, and it's one project that we reviewed.
Okay, gotcha. And the neighborhoods and the residents there were happy with the mitigation as it relates to traffic?
Yes, we had a lot of support at the public meeting, and the school district has received letters of intent from all of the property owners to the south, affirming that they will be in accordance with this plan.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I guess the only question that I had was, I hope that we've invested whatever we need to make this a very safe route to school for the people and the children who are walking or riding their bikes. And so if we need to direct any of our safe routes to school money from our levy dollars, I hope that we're doing that. It's really important.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll take that into account.
Okay, well, since we're not taking any action tonight, that's our information for now. And then we'll have a chance to read the input from the East Bellevue Community Council and make a decision next week, did you think?
November 2nd.
Oh, you said that, sorry, November 2nd, perfect. Wonderful. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That is the end of our packed meeting. Thank you so much. It was a very good conversations tonight. We'll see you next week. Meeting's adjourned. Good night.